this is Jane Low, and I'm here in Singapore in the Central Business District area of Singapore. And with me today, I'm very pleased and very privileged to have Brandon Collin, who is the Vice Chairman with Blue Voyant, all the way from Hawaii in the United States. So thank you so much for your time today, Brandon.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, so Brandon, you're going to be sharing with us about the cybersecurity skill set and as well as the evolution of the cyber threat landscape from the early days of your career at government agencies to the recent times of AI and supply chain concerns. So let's start with your early days of your career. So as I understand it, Brandon, you have more than 20 years of experience in cybersecurity, and the first half of your career, you spent a lot of time with the National Security Agency in the United States. And I think that is of great interest to many of our audience to learn about, maybe some of the lessons or some of the interesting observations that you've seen, because NSA, of course, is at the forefront of technology when it comes to cyber.
Yeah, I found, I think there's a lot of things that can be learned. I think other government agencies as well are very sort of, they've taken some of the lessons learned from NSA, particularly in the workforce development aspects of actually setting up training programs, hiring people who may not be necessarily directly skilled and have a lot of expertise or a lot of experience, training them up to a certain skill level, and then operationalizing what they learn, and then learning new things. There's new techniques, tactics. NSA is obviously heavily involved in both offensive and defensive cyber. I think some of the advances that they've made, particularly over the last 10 years after I left NSA,
yep,
they've made significant advances on the defensive side in public-private partnerships and working with private industry, private sector, sharing some of the things that they've learned. It's been super interesting.
Yeah, that's something that I want to tap into a bit more in terms of information sharing with the private sector, because obviously after NSA you enter the private sector.
Yes.
So that'll be interesting to see how the dynamics work from the other side. But before I go into that, right, so was there any sort of a particular skill set that you tapped into when you were at NSA? Because those were the years, I think, was 2002 to 2010, 11 you were at NSA?
2013, yeah. 2013. So 2002 to 2013.
So that was obviously the days before, social media become a platform for threat actors to leverage for phishing and social engineering. And that was also, I guess, the early days of using zero-day exploits and vulnerabilities. So how was, do you see, that the particular kind of skill set that was required during those early years of the cybersecurity landscape was really more technical than anything else?
I think that's a great question. I think that actually applies directly to kind of the cybersecurity industry right now and workforce development. A lot of the skills that we looked for initially when hiring people who were unskilled, right? Somewhat of a technical background that you would need, but really you want a curious mind and an analytic, the analytic background of being able to sort of analyze problems, be able to break those problems down, and then focus on the things that are important and work through those problems. And then certainly like the technology aspects of things, you have to be able to learn that, but it's not something that is sort of necessarily required in the beginning, right? And I think that applies directly to the way the workforce shortage right now within cybersecurity. A lot of the job vacancies that you see out there are like, a lot of these companies are saying, hey, you need 10 years experience in this technology this technology. But in reality, you need kind of an intelligent person, a curious mind with the appropriate sort of skill set to break down problems, and then the ability to learn the technology. So that's how I view it. That's how we at our company view it, and I know that's how the sort of government is looking at it as well.
So that hasn't really changed since the early days of cybersecurity, I guess.
I mean, not so much. Now you do have the opportunity to see people with, I have 20 years of experience in cybersecurity, so you do see the ability to have that. But in general, it seems like companies are still focusing on let's hire somebody and not train them up. As opposed to sort of let's hire a junior person and then teach them the skills that they need in order to solve the problem. I know from a Blue Voyant standpoint, we definitely focus on higher skilled people. We have a lot of people who used to work for government agencies at Blue Voyant, but we also are hiring junior people because we know that that's the future of how we want to sort of develop capabilities broadly.
Well, talking about that, you mentioned about analytical skill set, right? The ability to digest a lot of information and interpret it and I'm going to come to that question later about how AI is going to change all that, but
Oh,
I think that's going to be your favorite topic.
Yeah.
But so going back to your career, so after you left NSA, you went into the private sector.
Yes.
Right, and that was 2013 onwards until, well, obviously now, and that was a very different period when it comes to cybersecurity, isn't it? Like,
it's super exciting. I've learned a ton over the last 10 years. I learned a ton while working for the government, but really over the last 10 years, it's been fascinating. So I had the opportunity to sort of go out, start a company myself, raise funds, and learn sort of the business aspects.
That's right.
And see how companies, in particular, I know this comes up. Companies are looking for solutions. They need help on things. They have a workforce shortage. So being able to sort of hit the sort of key factors that they need to solve, or key problems that they need to solve, and be able to do that in a smart way and an efficient way is really something that I'm sort of passionate about. So was able to do that initially with a startup.
Right.
Moved into, did some consulting, worked for the financial sector, looked at sort of big systemic risk issues in the financial sector, which is fascinating. Just sort of learning how the financial sector works, and then the technologies that underpin those critical things, and see what cybersecurity problems those technologies have. It was really sort of exciting. And then Blue Point is even more, like, I can go on and on. I get very passionate about it. So yes.
That case also where we see a lot of financial hacks, right? A lot of credit card information is being sold on the darknet, and then we also see obviously the threat actors, the diversification of the profile. So we are looking at nation-state actors maybe the previous decade before, but now you have cyber criminals, right? Looking to monetize all the information, the data breaches becoming more and more.
It's big business, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So it's pretty interesting.
So going back to the information sharing that you raised earlier. So you are now on the other side of the fence, if I may call it, right? How do you see this information sharing sort of partnership? What is working and what is not?
I think a lot of, there's a number of different organizations globally that sort of operate in that information sharing space. In some cases, they're called ISACs. So, for example, like the financial sector has the FS-ISAC.
Exactly.
There's some critical infrastructure focus within the ARC, the Analysis and Resilience Center. There's the HISAC for healthcare information sharing. So it's really interesting and great to see that, because those communities and the ability to collaborate both amongst just the industry themselves without sort of fear of like sharing company secrets or anything like that. It's like, hey, we're seeing this problem, how do we solve it? And the government having a place to go, any government really. So you could talk about sort of the Singaporean government, the Australian government, the UK, the US, it gives them a focal point to say, hey, we need to influence security in a specific industry. We're going to talk with them, with the ISAC, about it to see what we can do to help, because we're seeing these threat actors do these things. We're not sure if the industry sees that. And then the ability to collaborate and say, oh, we're seeing that here, right? A bank might say, oh, we're seeing that threat here in these areas. Are you seeing it? Oh, we're not seeing that. And being able to say, oh, something new has popped up. What kind of problems are they causing? And that sort of collaboration in those environments for companies and people to actually, because in the end it's people, right? It's the personalities, and them being able to share both with like government agencies and then with other people in their sectors about specific threats, specific actions that they can take, and lessons learned that they can share. Yeah, I'm a big proponent of those.
Right, I'm going to ask you a question which may be slightly sensitive. We hear about the WannaCry incident in 2016 and how there's a possibility of involvement from the government in terms of developing the exploits. So do you think that information sharing is not quite working in some ways?
No, I think I don't have any comment. I was well outside of the government by that point, so I have no insight into anything. No comment on that aspect. But I do think there are gaps in information sharing, and some of it is for legitimate reasons, right? Like countries have specific goals that they want to keep in mind, and we all kind of understand that from a foreign intelligence standpoint, right? I mean, but in the end, most governments want to protect the people that are part of them, that are their citizens, right? And it's that sort of drive that is always at the forefront of any of these information sharing groups. So it's like if a government is coming in and talking to them, it is it's for a good reason, right? And generally speaking, companies are trying trying to do the right thing. They want to protect their networks. They want to protect their clients, right? So it's all about sort of protecting the data, protecting privacy, making sure that, people's money isn't getting stolen or their healthcare information isn't getting out and that sort of thing. So, I mean, certainly there's always room for improvement, but all these groups are trying to figure it out as they're going, right?
They're kind of like different tiers in information sharing, the ISACs as well, right?
Yes. Absolutely. Yeah. And there's some, there's some organizations that you trust more than others, that you'll share more sensitive data with. And I mean, just from like a company standpoint, there's organizations that you will share with,
right.
and there's others that you probably won't. It's like, wait, we've tried to share with them before and it didn't work out, so maybe we'll not be as
it's a human
open
thing,
with them.
isn't it?
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
We
absolutely.
do that as individuals.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
It's all about sort of like the trust relationships that you build and the ability to collaborate with people.
That's right.
So that community, those communities of interest or communities of trust, really kind of go really far though in solving big problems, right? You'll see it with like large companies as well, like Microsoft and like their ability to share and help take down different criminal actor groups, right? Like they've led a number of these different
That's
operations. It's really been significant, right? So there's always room for improvement. Don't get me wrong.
Of course.
And not everybody is talking at the
well,
same level.
Well, if we're perfect, there won't be any cybersecurity vendors.
I wouldn't have a job. Yes, so that would not be, not that I'm.
Right.
But yes, yeah.
So talking about the cyber threat landscape during those years, right? So we talked about the diversification of the threat actor profiles, monetization. We're looking at monetization, no longer just disruption, right? So do you think that the threat actors, their skill set is always seem to be a lot more sophisticated than the cyber defenders?
I think that word sophisticated is almost overused in a lot of cases,
right.
Because they are sophisticated, but so is the cybersecurity industry itself. It's sophisticated, but to say that it is like an advanced threat actor or that sort of term is always I find it interesting, because in the end, as a threat actor, the goal is to use the least amount of resources possible to break into a network, right? Like they're not going. It's like, we're not going to spend $20 million on an exploit in order to like break into a company and steal $200,000, right? It's like, I want to get in the cheapest way possible and the most efficient way possible, in the same way that the defenders are like, I want to be able to protect my network in the most efficient way possible, right? I don't want to spend an exorbitant amount of money on defending, in the same way that threat actors, but don't get me wrong, there's always cleverness involved in the threat actors. I mean, it's fascinating to track when you look at, for example, everything from like, ransomware to money laundering to, money mules to like, people like using, a whole network of like mule herders and that sort of thing in order to get the actual money out when they do steal money, right? It's a very sophisticated network. And it's a clever network.
It's very organized,
but it's
as well.
but it's a criminal network, right? I mean, like, but criminals, you could say the same thing about any criminal, right? Like, it's money laundering. You need to like have a level of knowledge about the money industry in order to be able to launder money, right? And it's not like you say it's a very sophisticated money launderer. You just, generally speaking, they're like, oh, it's a money launderer, right? Like so it's interesting to use that sophisticated threat actor terminology.
I see what
advanced
you mean.
Threat,
right.
I mean,
I see what you mean.
They are. It's clever. It's interesting, and
It's
it's fascinating, some of the techniques that come up, and the tactics that they use. But yeah.
So you think that we are sort of, we are in a cat and mouse game, aren't we?
Absolutely.
When it comes to this. And they, as you mentioned, they use the least amount of resources in order to achieve their goals. So their ROI is very high.
Absolutely, yeah.
And our ROI on the cyber defenders, we always hear that it's a difficult debate, and when it gets to the board discussion level.
Right, quantifying the amount of money that you should spend on defending your networks in order to raise the cost to the adversary, because you want to raise their costs as much as possible in their operations. So they're like, I'm not going to target that company anymore, or I'm going to shift my capabilities to some other area. So you're always constantly trying to, that ROI is definitely important.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah.
I think the board level discussion is a whole new topic that we can, drill into.
It is, yeah, and it's always like keeping things at the right level for the board so that they can digest it in the way, and that's always a problem from like the technology standpoint. CIOs had this problem as far as like the level of investment in IT infrastructure,
That's right.
that sort of thing. Same thing for CISOs, and now sort of like being able to report the right level of metrics in a format that can be digested by the board, right? I know within the U.S. there's the SEC. They've had some new rules and regulations, and there's been a big push to have a board director that would be experienced in cyber, but being able to translate that for the rest of the board. It's not, you're not just talking to one person in the same way that the financials are not just talking to one person on a board. It's, getting it at the right level, the right metrics, the right measurements, and then tracking progress.
Right, okay,
yeah.
so talking about that kind of conversation, right? If we look at the last couple of years, right, and we see this rise in ransomware, this rise in supply chain attacks. So are those board level conversations getting easier? Because, less challenging because the cyber threats is getting more frequent, right? So everybody knows what's going on to some extent.
I think in some of the more sophisticated companies, yes, they are getting the conversations are not necessarily getting easier, but it's very much like there are characterizations of what things should be tracked, right? Like when you talk about like a CFO or the balance sheet, everybody knows what a balance sheet looks like. Everybody knows what a good balance sheet is and what a bad balance sheet is when you talk about from a finance standpoint. I think they're still tweaking the actual, like the specific things, like EBITDA is a known financial sort of metric, right? When you're talking about like software companies, or really any company. But like when you talk about cyber, it's like, well, what is it? Is it mean time to resolution, right? That might be the metric that you want to drive towards. Is it patch cadence? Is it number of things that you cover within the MITRE ATT&CK framework? Is it how much of your supply chain are you covering, right? Are you monitoring the companies in your supply chain or your vendor?
Yeah, it's very different for different businesses and organizations, isn't it?
Yeah,
you have different priorities.
Yeah.
And
how does it affect the business? In
That's
the
right,
end,
exactly.
it's all about like how are you affecting your clients? Are you protecting their information appropriately? Like their actual like healthcare information or their credit card information or their private information? Are you protecting it? And then are you protecting the business? Right? Are the business operations? Are you still going to be able to operate? That's really kind of what the board should be caring about, and are you investing resources appropriately in the right areas? And certainly supply chain and third-party risk has been sort of a huge increase. There's been an increase in incidents. There's been an increase in sort of reliance on technology and third parties to actually conduct business. So that's been a big push as well, as can be evidenced by some of the different rules and regulations that have come out recently.
I think there's a lot we can cover, but I think
I know it's a short. Sorry.
It's a short podcast. No, I'm just going to say that I'm going to bring up my sort of last question, right? So when it comes to ROI, and then there's a lot of talk about artificial intelligence and how that's going to, hopefully increase the productivity when it comes to cybersecurity, threat intelligence analysis, right? Ability to respond quicker. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think there's kind of two areas, particularly with the LLMs that have like come out recently, but there's certainly other models using AI that are appropriate for solving problems. We use it pretty heavily in Blue Voyant in a couple of different areas. I see a lot of gains that can be had from a threat intelligence characterization standpoint. So that translation, and I hesitate to even use this, but sort of dumbing it down to the point and getting things sort of crystallized of like, hey, there are all these problems that we've identified, but we're solving them in this way, and being able to translate that into a short sentence, concise, bulletized, something that is easily consumable by a board, right? That's a perfect answer to it. Others would be also like customer engagement on different, the ability to engage appropriately, to say, hey, we've seen this threat actor taking these actions, you should probably take these actions to help solve your problems. That's one area that I find interesting. But then even more importantly, I would say, is the actual translation of sort of unformatted text and unformatted things that are required for cybersecurity and regulations and for like actually like business operations, being able to translate that into sort of like easily digestible and risk-based sort of approaches to different problems. By the same token, I can see threat actors doing the same thing.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's and a lot of these models are not fully baked, right? Like when you're using them, there's gaps, and it gets you a certain distance.
That's right.
But you can see it in creating like fake companies or fake domain names.
That's
or
right,
like
yeah.
fake personalities and that sort of thing. You can see the threat actors using these things and a story like, hey, I'm no longer going to try and craft an email in a language
right.
that I don't understand, right? It's not my first language. I can just get an LLM to craft the email, and it might end up being better than what I would craft in order to get somebody to click on a link.
Yeah.
Right? You can see that happening.
Oh,
definitely.
yeah, I think they're using it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
100%.
So again, it's going to be a cat and mouse game, and it's
Yep.
never ending, right?
Yeah.
So coming to my very last question, right? So looking at your career for more than 20 years, spanning the government sector and the private sector, right? What are the skills that you say remain consistently sort of, crucial in cyber defense?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm mentoring one person now. She's just recently sort of joined a cybersecurity company elsewhere, but I think she's sort of the prototypical answer that we need in cybersecurity, which is the same thing I said before. Really, it's a curious mind, the ability to actually learn cybersecurity. Right, you don't need to know it, but she's like as someone who has the ability to learn sort of the different technologies that underpin things, the functions, the business functions that we're going to be relying on. But that curious mind and the analytic mindset is really kind of the biggest thing. How do I solve these problems? How do I aggressively go after them? Can I learn new technologies, right? I mean, there's always new technologies that are coming online that you have to learn and understand how that impacts cybersecurity, right? LLMs are a great example of that, right?
That's right.
You have to be curious in order, because it's not the same as the ML solutions that were, or models that were used maybe 10 years ago, right? Like, so it's like, how does this impact cybersecurity? What things should I do? What things should I focus on? So that's what I would say is kind of the biggest thing is getting kids interested from a curiosity standpoint early. Show them that, I mean, this is going to be a problem. AI is not going to solve everything. You're still going to have to be able to like steer these models in the right way. But doing it with a curious mind and an analytic mindset.
So that's a good point. Showing the children early and their formation years, introducing them to the world of computers, into the world of, I guess, cybersecurity and the possible, programming and coding and how to spot maybe vulnerabilities.
Yeah, and it's everything from those sort of capture the flag things that you see. I know where I live in Hawaii, we have like with the University of Hawaii, they're doing a lot of really cool things with like the different age groups. So like
cool.
getting down, we have Blue Voyant. We host some things in Baltimore as well. Basically like internships and that sort of thing. Getting kids sort of involved early. It's great to sort of get kids interested in things. Let them play with things. Early on. So it's like, oh, this is it's. I always get sort of corrected about this, but like as a business person, this stuff is fun, right? It's entertaining. You're always solving new problems, right?
That's
you said about cat and mouse. It's fun to be the cat, right? You're like constantly trying to like figure out what's happening and how to build a better mousetrap and like how to solve new problems. It's exciting. It's exciting stuff. So. Yep.
Right, okay. So, Brendan, I'm very aware that, we are getting blown away by the
I know,
words.
sorry.
I'm afraid that we'll have to end the podcast. But so thank you so much for sharing your
time.
insights about, the cyber threat landscape and how it has evolved over the years during your time with the government sector, the private sector, and also sharing some of the tips for us to take away in terms of how to cultivate that curiosity mindset in children from young so that we get them into the cybersecurity field.
Awesome.
From young.
It was so great meeting you. Thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it.